You're not being spiritual, you're just being weird. Now, this is one of my favorite topics to talk about because, well, let's just say people in the meditative community can be a little eccentric. Yeah, weird. All right, I'm going to give you 5 of these that are my favorite ones, but the first one is if you need to wear special clothes in public. If the spiritual world's a real thing, and really we're just exploring different facets of the world around us, you shouldn't need to wear a special hat, a special coat, a special pair of shoes in order to engage with that because it's just reality. It's already there. Now, this isn't to say that ritual clothing or apparel can't be important. In fact, ritual clothing and apparel can be very important depending upon what you're dealing with. But it isn't something that you need to wear in public to broadcast to everybody else about just how special you are. Because, let me be clear, they already know how special you are. You're just not special in a good way. All right, this comes to number 2 on my list. If you think the world is ending. Oh boy, here's a good one. The dying man myth is a really old one. The myth of a corrupt world is a very old theory, none of which has really ever come true. I mean, the best that can be said about an apocalypse is all apocalypse are, in fact, local, which is kind of funny when you think about it. Sure, the fall of the Roman Empire, when it happened, was probably a pretty big deal to the people who were experiencing it. On the other hand, if you were over in Beijing at the time, you probably didn't even know what was going on. This is the problem with all of these end of the world theories. And yes, I throw climate change, pestilence, war, and all the rest of that into it. There are local problems because the world's just too damn big. Even if you assume climate change is real, even if you assume the worst predictions regarding climate change are real. Yeah, that might be a big deal if you live somewhere near the equator, but if you live a little further north, say around where Canada's at, if anything, it might make your winters quite a bit easier to bear. So there's been nothing to indicate that the world's coming to an end. There have been lots of people who predicted the end of the world for any number of nonsensical reasons, and it hasn't happened yet. Even if the Soviets and the Americans had had a general nuclear exchange, yeah, life would have been pretty bad in North America, Russia, and Europe. But sub-Saharan Africa, South Africa, Southeast Asia, probably wouldn't have even known anything had gone on. Number 3, if you believe various conspiracy theories, we've talked a lot about conspiracy theories on this channel, you're probably the one with the problem, not the problem you're trying to address. One of the interesting things about seeing things on the astral is that the astral realm is a timeless place. So if there's something out there, there's no guarantee it's going to happen on a timeline that matters to you. That's an important factor. However, 2, because things can be built on the astral using just breath and thought, there's also no guarantee that those things are even likely to happen. And the added kicker to this is that the things that are especially bright, both, oddly enough, utopian visions and visions of complete destruction or the end of the world, for example, are the ones that are in fact the easiest to see because they are the most emotionally and therefore energetically charged. That doesn't mean they're likely to happen. So what does this have to do with various conspiracies? Well, as we've talked about a lot before, egregores can hang out on the astral for extended periods of time, which can make visions of certain things very easy to see. That doesn't mean they're particularly applicable to the world you live in, nor does that mean they're very likely to happen. See, the problem with the conspiracy is you have to keep it a secret, and everybody likes to gossip. some people more than others. But because of this, keeping a secret that involves, well, more than one person is really rather hard. For that reason, conspiracies are almost impossible to pull off for any length of time. Honestly, they're mostly just a bunch of nonsense. Also, a lot of people like to engage in conspiracies because it relieves them of the responsibility for, well, engaging in their own lives. The fact of the matter is, there are a lot of things that go wrong in the world. Most of them actually have pretty simple answers, even if they're not really something that can be solved. Blaming it on this other, especially if the other is particularly well-financed and particularly elitist, is a good excuse for explaining away your own inadequacies. And that's honestly what I've seen with most conspiracy theories. Number 4, if you have to follow a special diet to be spiritual, then how spiritual can you really be? As we've talked about before, the meditative world is really mostly about seeing the world as it is. Now, we use some interesting tools to do this with, some of which take a fair amount of work to engage, but ultimately we're just looking at reality. If you need a special diet to engage in reality, there's something strange going on there, and it's probably not with reality. Now, as we've also talked about, certain diets make it easier to do out-of-body travel. Other diets reinforce transmission ability. So that's not to say that you can't use a diet to enhance your ability to do something. But if you need a super special diet to be super spiritual, you're probably super full of something else. Because again, if you look at the historical record regarding different esoteric practices, there have been vegans, there have been raw vegans, there have been pescatarians, there have been omnivores, there have been people who eat only diets that consist of meat. The reality is you don't need a super special diet to engage with the metaphysical. You do act like a loon when you try to push this on other people, insisting that they need to. And also keep in mind, genetics have a lot to do with dietary tolerance. Some people can handle a high carbohydrate diet just fine. Other people really can't. So it would be an interesting world if God, for lack of a better reason, only allowed people to engage in direct activity with the divine if they followed a super special diet that not everybody can actually follow. Food for thought. All right, and number 5. If you think you found a way to live forever, or live without food, or live without water, or live without air, yeah, you might be the one with the problem. See, here's the thing, folks, and I've talked about longevity technology on this channel before. I've talked about the benefits of fasting and a whole bunch of other things you can do. But as of the recording of this video in early 2025, if you are born, you are in fact going to die. And the chances are you are going to live less than 120 years when it happens. If you're in a developed part of the world, and you're lucky and you have the right genetics, that'll probably be somewhere between your late 70s and maybe about 90. So far, there haven't been many big improvements on this. Now, I do think longevity technology that's real and works will certainly be available in the next 20 to 30 years, but it's not here right now. So whenever I've looked into these crazy stories of people living to be hundreds of years old and so forth, frankly, it's all been a complete lie. There have been a couple of occasions where I've read about people who were able to place their bodies into suspended animation for extended periods of time and then reanimate themselves as necessary. But they weren't really getting any more activity out of the body, and by virtue of doing that, they were largely removing themselves from society. Likewise, when I've looked into movements like breatharianism, or people who were living off the power of the sun and the rest of it, no, these were just people who were intentionally starving themselves. And of course, they'd occasionally break from this and eat a lot for short periods of time. I'm not going to comment upon how healthy that kind of thing is, but the reality is, if you're alive today, you will eventually die. You do need to breathe, you do need to drink water, and you do need to consume nutrients in order to survive as of right now. So, that's my rundown of 5 things that if you do them, it doesn't mean you're being spiritual, it just means you're being weird. Otherwise, as per usual, train hard and be well.